Well, today we're going to kind of kick it old school, and we're going to let God's word be God's preached word. Most of the message today will simply be the reading of the 17th chapter of the first book of Samuel. You'll probably recognize it. Maybe looking at a slingshot and a stick, you might guess that is the story of David and Goliath, and we are going to get to that later. But first, let's talk about Halloween a little bit. This is the time for people to dream up spooky costumes and scary decorations and frightening houses of horror. And for all of us, we have something that makes us scared. Maybe something that is so frightening that just the mere word sends a tingle up your spine. Maybe for you it's ghost, or demon, or monsters, or spiders, or bats, zombies. In my childhood, our home was up against a park. And during the day, it was a wonderful place to play football and to catch frogs in the pond. But on dark October nights, in the imagination of a 6-year-old, that park was filled with ghosts and swamp monsters who might rise up to catch little kids and drag them off to their lairs. At least that's what the older kids told us. But I grew up, and so did you. And we no longer worry about swamp monsters in the park. But there are words that still strike fear in our hearts, that still send a shiver up our spine. They're just different words. Words like audit, accident, bill collector, cancer, divorce, defriend. Can I see your license? I'm sorry, but you're fired. And the most frightening one around here, would you lead us in prayer? Unlike swamp monsters, these things are real, and we can't stop being afraid simply by pretending they don't exist, because they do. So, how do we deal with this? Is it okay if we just are afraid? Well, I don't think so. Because, you see, fearful people do stupid things. I did a quick search of the Bible, looking for fearful people and observing what they did. And over again, the fearful people did something stupid. I mean, you can't hardly get through the beginning of the Bible. In fact, in the very first book, Genesis, in the 3rd chapter already, we find fearful people. Adam realizes that he is naked. Adam and Eve are fearful. It says that God passed by in the cool of the day, and Adam hid from God. God called out, "Where are you?" And Adam replied, "I heard you in the garden, and I was afraid, so I hid." Stupid act of fear number 1, hiding from God. And it just goes on from there. In Genesis chapter 18, Sarah is told by God that she is going to have a child, and this child is going to be part of God's plan to bless the world. But Sarah laughs at the idea that God could use her that way. And worse yet, when she's asked why she laughed at God's plan, this is what it says. Sarah was afraid, so she lied and said, "I didn't laugh." Stupid act of fear number 2, telling lies and laughing at God's plan. Actually, I don't know if that's number 2, because there are so many instances of fear and stupidity in the Bible that I couldn't look them all up. But I go on to Numbers chapter 13 and 14. Moses' scouts are sent into the promised land. And there's wonderful things there, but they're also afraid, so they exaggerate the obstacles. The land we explored devours those living in it. These scouts report, "All the people are huge. We saw giants there. We seem like grasshoppers to them." And so the people who had just escaped slavery in Egypt are so afraid, they shout out, "Why did the Lord bring us to this land only to kill us?" We should choose a new leader and go back to Egypt. How stupid. Give up everything, go back to slavery and death because they're afraid of giants who weren't even there. Now jump to 1 Samuel 17, and you'll find a giant who is there, Goliath. And you'll find a guy named David. Have you heard of him? Probably. We're going to get to his story in a minute. But after David's victory over the giant, his king Saul becomes jealous of him and of his relationship with God, and Saul begins to imagine that his faithful servant David is actually a threat. And so it says, Saul became still more afraid of him, and he remained his enemy the rest of his days. Saul's fear turned a friend into an enemy. See, fearful people do stupid things. And perhaps the greatest example of this in all of history is the fear that got a hold of the Roman governor Pontius Pilate, that made him decide to send Jesus to the cross. In John 19, Jesus is on trial before Pilate, and the people are shouting that according to the law, he deserves to die for blasphemy because he's called himself the Son of God. And in verse 8 of chapter 19 of John, it says, when Pilate heard this, he was even more afraid. And so just 8 verses later, he hands Jesus over to be crucified. Fearful people do stupid things, even kill Jesus. So what can we do about our fears? Sure, sometimes we exaggerate the problems, but there are real threats. How can we avoid doing stupid things? Well, to find the answer to that, let's go back to that famous story of David facing the giant. It's in 1 Samuel 17, and the page number is wrong in the bulletin. So if you want to follow along, it starts on page 445 in the Pew Bible. You may have heard this story a dozen times, but usually we condense it or make it shorter, and we miss some of the things that are going on. 1 Samuel chapter 17. Now Saul, the king, and the Israelites assembled and camped in the valley of Elah and drew up their battle line to meet the Philistines. The Philistines occupied one hill, and the Israelites another, with the valley in between them. So you got the picture? There's a hill over here, and the Philistines are there, and there's a hill over here, and the Israelites are there, and there's this no man's land in between. And they're facing each other down. A champion named Goliath, who was from Gath, came out of the Philistine camp. He was 9 feet tall and had a bronze helmet on his head and wore a coat of scale armor of bronze weighing 125 pounds. On his legs he wore bronze greaves, and a bronze javelin was slung on his back. His spear shaft was like a weaver's rod, and its iron point weighed 15 pounds. His shield bearer went ahead of him. If you've seen this in a cartoon version, or maybe even in some Sunday school literature, you've probably imagined Goliath as like the jolly green giant, only with armor. Some huge thing towering like a skyscraper. It's not really the picture here. The picture is really of a really tall guy. A tall guy like this, Robert Wadlow, who is just an inch under 9 feet tall. One of the tallest people that we have a picture of. So this is really what we're looking at. Somebody like Goliath. And when it says that his armor weighed 125 pounds, well, our Marines in Afghanistan typically carry packs of 130 pounds or more. So our Marines are running around with the same amount of stuff on their backs as the giant Goliath. So just put it into context. Still, if you're a young guy, he's pretty big. Actually, he's pretty big for anybody. So Goliath stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel, "Why do you come out and line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine, and aren't you servants of Saul? Choose a man and have him come down to me, and if he's able to fight and kill me, we'll become your subjects. But if I overcome him and kill him, You will become our subjects and serve us." Then the Philistine said, "This day I defy the ranks of Israel. Give me a man and let us fight each other." On hearing the Philistine's words, Saul and all the Israelites were dismayed and terrified. This is fear time. Scary business. Nobody wants to face the giant. Now David was the son of an Ephrathite named Jesse, who was from Bethlehem in Judah. And Jesse had 8 sons, and in Saul's time he was old and well advanced in years. And Jesse's 3 oldest sons had followed Saul into the war. So, skip a little bit. It says David was the youngest. The 3 oldest followed Saul, but David went back and forth from Saul to tend his father's sheep at Bethlehem. Get the picture? The older brothers are often in the military. Younger brother David has to stay home and take care of chores. But his dad is old and getting up there in years, and so David is the one that runs back and forth with communication and things for his older brothers who are at the front. For 40 days, the Philistine came forward every morning and evening and took his stand. Now Jesse said to his son David, "Take this basket of roasted grain and these 10 loaves of bread for your brothers, and hurry to their camp. Take along these 10 cheeses to the commander of their unit. See how your brothers are, and bring back some assurance from them." There was Saul and all the men of Israel in the valley of Elah fighting against the Philistines. So, Dad sends a care package to his sons at the front through young David. Verse 20, early in the morning, David left the flock with a shepherd, loaded up and set out as Jesse had directed. He reached the camp as the army was going into battle positions, shouting the war cry. Israel and the Philistines were drawing up their lines, facing each other. David left his things with the keeper's supplies, ran to the battle lines, and greeted his brothers. As he was talking with them, Goliath, the Philistine champion from Gath, stepped out from his lines and shouted his usual defiance, and David heard it. When the Israelites saw the man, they all ran from him in great fear. It's fear time. Now the Israelites had been saying, "Do you see how this man keeps coming out? He keeps coming out to defy Israel. And the king will give great wealth to the man who kills him. He will also give him his daughter in marriage and will exempt his father's family from taxes in Israel." Interesting incentive there. You get the princess, and you get to go tax-free. Some of these things would probably be a reward for people today. Although it's interesting that it says his father's family will be exempt from taxes. Is that implying that he's not coming back? I don't know. David asked the men standing near him, "What will be done for the man who kills this Philistine and removes this disgrace from Israel? Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God?" And they repeated to him what they'd been saying and told him this is what will be done for the man who kills him. Now when Eliab, David's oldest brother, heard him speaking with the men, he burned with anger at him and asked, "Why have you come down here? And with whom did you leave those few sheep in the desert? I know how conceited you are and how wicked your heart is. You came down only to watch the battle." Now isn't this typical older brother talk? "Why are you hanging around, little brother? Why are you here? I know you're just here to see some action." And David says, "What have I done? Can I even speak?" Typical little brother talk. He then turned away to someone else and brought up the same matter, and the men answered as before. And when David was overheard, what David said was overheard and reported to King Saul, and Saul sent for him. David said to Saul, "Let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine. Your servant will go and fight him." And Saul replied, "You're not able to go out against this Philistine and fight him. You're only a boy, and he's been a fighting man since his youth." Now, we sometimes picture a boy as somebody like Connor's age. Now, that isn't the David and Goliath story. Boy as in teenager, non-trained, not a trained warrior like Goliath. Saul replied, "You're not able to go against this Philistine and fight him. You're only a boy, and he's been fighting man from his youth." But David said to Saul, "Your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. And when a lion or bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went and struck it and rescued the sheep from its mouth. And when it turned on me, I seized it by its hair, struck it, and killed it. Your servant has killed both a lion and a bear. This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, because he has defied the armies of the living God. Now listen, the Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. Saul said to David, "Go, and the Lord be with you." Then Saul dressed David in his own tunic. He put a coat of armor on him and a bronze helmet on his head. And you can just imagine this great big armor that is being put on David. So, well, okay, David and I have a different problem. David fastened on his sword over the tunic and tried to walk around because he was not used to them. "I can't go in these," he said to Saul, "because I'm not used to them." So he takes off the armor, and then he took his staff in his hand, and he chose 5 smooth stones from the stream, and he put them in the pouch in the shepherd's bag, and with his sling in his hand, he approached the Philistine. Now, meanwhile, the Philistine with his shield bearer in front of him kept coming closer to David. And he looked David over and saw that he was only a boy, ruddy and handsome, and he despised him. He said to David, "Am I a dog that you come at me with sticks?" And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. "Come here," he said, "and I'll give your flesh to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field." And David said to the Philistine, "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you've defied. This day the Lord will hand you over to me, and I'll strike you down and cut off your head. Today I'll give the carcasses of the Philistine army to the birds of the air and the beasts of the earth, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. All those gathered here will know that it's not by the sword or the spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all of you into our hands." As the Philistine moved closer to attack David, David ran toward the battle line to meet him. Reaching into his bag and taking out a stone, he slung it and struck the Philistine in the forehead. The stone sank into his forehead, and he fell face down on the ground. And so David triumphed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone. Without a sword in his hand, he struck down the Philistine. It's such a wonderful story. But did you see it? Did you see how he's able to overcome his fear? It's right there in verses 37 and verses 47. "The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and the bear will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. And all those gathered here will know that it's not by sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle belongs to the Lord." David knows that the Lord is his deliverer, and he knows that the battle is the Lord's. It may look like David is out there facing Goliath all on his own, but he knows that it is the Lord's battle. It may look like he's in a frightening and unwinnable situation, but David knows that God is with him, and this is God's battle. It kind of reminds me of that old bumper sticker, "If God is your co-pilot, switch seats." David knows that he's in the co-pilot seat, and God's in charge. He knows it's God's battle, and no matter what happens to him, God will be victorious, and God will ultimately save him. That's the key to fearless living. We can be fearless like David when we know that the battle belongs to God, and no matter how big the giant, God is bigger, and God will never abandon us. This too you can find all over the Bible. From front to back, over and over again, we're told to not be afraid because God is with us. Genesis 26:24, "Don't be afraid, for I'm with you." Deuteronomy 31:6, "Be strong and courageous. Don't be afraid, for the Lord your God goes with you. He will never leave you or forsake you." Isaiah 41:10, "So don't fear, for I am with you. Don't be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and uphold you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand." There are big, scary things out there, not just Halloween ghosts, but God is bigger. So live fearlessly. Look your giants right in the face and say, "You're not so scary, for the battle belongs to my God, and my God will deliver me." Let's pray. Oh God, even though we may walk through the valley of the shadow of death, may we fear no evil, for you are with us. Amen.